Welcome back to my channel. I have always thought that a random person using just the consensus big board could draft just as well as the pros, and in today's video I will put that to the test. So I will be looking at the previous 3 years of the consensus big board of the NFL draft, the actual draft picks, and then the most famous and most hated NFL draft analyst, which is, as you all know, Mel Kiper, and I will compare the three to how the drafts actually turned out and see if you would have been better off just using the big board, if Mel Kiper was better, or if the NFL GMs who spend their entire life, spend months and thousands of hours, who would turn out the best. And in today's video, we will find out. And I don't have, 1,000 hours, so I'm just going to go over the first, maybe 10 or 15 picks of the past 3 drafts. So starting in 2021, I'm going to first go over how the draft happened. I will then go over how Mel Kiper predicted it to happen. And then finally, I will go over, I guess not finally, then I will go over the consensus big board, which is just accumulation of random people's big boards, easily available. If I were to draft, I would probably just follow that. I will compare it to that. And then finally, compare it to who the best players from the draft ended up being. How the draft turned out. Trevor Lawrence, number 1. Good pick. Zach Wilson, number 2. Terrible pick. Trey Lance, number 3. Maybe a worse pick. I'm not really sure. But he played less games. 4. Kyle Pitts. Everybody liked Kyle Pitts going into this year, but he just did not work out. Number 5 in the draft, Jamar Chase, potentially the best player in this draft. Home run. Jalen Waddle, number 6, iffy. A low tier number 1 wide receiver. Great number 2, but very low tier number 1. Number 7, Penei Sewell, is another home run, the best offensive lineman from the draft, or one of the best at least. Number 8, J.C. Horn, a talented corner who has been hurt all the time. Pat Surtain, a great corner. Devontae Smith, number 10, mid-tier number 1 wide receiver, I guess I would say. Pretty happy with the number 10 overall pick, though. Then Justin Fields at 11 and Micah Parsons at 12. So this is how the NFL did it. Up next is Mel Kiper's big board of 2021, right before the draft occurred. So, Trevor Lawrence, number 1. Everyone knew this. Kyle Pitts was his number 2 player in the draft. So he was drafted number 4. Everyone loved him. Everyone was like, he's the best tight end I've ever seen. And then he just hasn't worked out. Number 3, this was very controversial, I would say, of Mel Kiper. And I'd say it was wrong. He had Devontae Smith as the 3rd best player in the draft over Jamar Chase, who he had at number 4. Then Jalen Waddle at 5. Once again, the 2 Alabama wide receivers, both good, both overrated by Mel Kiper. Penei Sewell, he had at 6, and Rashawn Slater at 7. These have turned out to be 2 fantastic offensive linemen. Great pick by Mel Kiper here. And then you'll notice another thing that Mel Kiper did very well this year. He didn't buy in on Zach Wilson. He sort of bought in on Justin Fields, but he didn't really buy in on the quarterbacks this year. It turned out to be a very smart move by Mel Kiper, who everybody hates. Except for the Mad Mel bit on Pat McAfee's show, which I think is hilarious. Then he had Elijah Vera Tucker at 10, Micah Parsons at 11, and Mac Jones at 12. Then finally the consensus big board for 2021. So this was made up of, as you can see here, 388 first-round mock drafts. It's just people out there. Some people might enter Mel Kipers, but it's just really a combination of the community. So it's no individual, but it's general consensus. So Trevor Lawrence 1, Zach Wilson 2, so they bought in as well on Zach Wilson, who did not turn out. Kyle Pitts was able to convince everybody in the world that he would be great. Justin Fields was able to get into the top 4. This was where, as I said just a minute ago, Mel Kiper really saw right through it and didn't like these quarterbacks. Number 5, Jamar Chase. The consensus did smartly have Jamar Chase above Devontae Smith and well above it at 5 to 10. And then they had Pat Surtain at 6, which they have him the highest, and he has turned out to be a great player, so another good move by them. They did have Trey Lance at 7, which is something that Mel Kiper really sniffed out and avoided. And then J.C. Horn, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Micah Parsons at 11, and then Penei Sewell at 12. And on this reimagination, redrafting the NFL draft that year, they still had Trevor Lawrence as number 1. Of course, you can't pass up a solid quarterback, even if he is not that good. Number 2, Penei Sewell, best offensive lineman in the draft. Of course, makes sense. Micah Parsons at 3, Jamar Chase at 4, and then Amon-Ra St. Brown. Nobody would have picked him in the first round, but he has been excellent. And, just rounding out the top 10, a bunch of players who were picked around the top 10. But in retrospect, who's the best? And I'm going to have to actually give it to Mel Kiper. I know. Cover your ears. Can't believe it. But I actually think he had the best here. He did have some misses, of course. But he had, most of the best players in the draft in the top 10. And he didn't fall for those quarterbacks who can be so tempting. As well as he had Penei Sewell and Rashawn Slater, 2 excellent linemen in his top 7. So, year 1, I'm giving to Mel Kiper. Okay, so now 2022. Jags picked Trayvon Walker, number 1 overall. This was a bit of a reach, and it hasn't worked out that well. Aiden Hutchinson, number 2 overall pick to the Lions, has been excellent. Derek Stingley, number 3 to the Texans. Most people thought Gardner was better, and Sauce Gardner has turned out to be much better. So it was a bit of a misplay, but Derek Stingley has still been very good. Of course, Sauce Gardner went number 4 to the Jets. Kayvon Thibodeau. I don't know. Kayvon has been solid. I mean, is he a top 5 defensive end? Is he a top 5 pick defensive end? No. But to me, he's more of a late in the first round defensive end. He's been solid. He just hasn't been game wrecking or anything like that. But he is still young. Then Ikem Iwonu. This video will be full of me not knowing how to pronounce people's names. But first offensive lineman taken in this draft. And honestly, he hasn't turned out that great. Evan Neal was picked next. And similar. Not amazing so far. Then Drake London to the Falcons. So back-to-back years picking offensive weapons in the top 10 of the first round. And they just haven't utilized them. But Drake London has showed a ton of promise, especially compared to the tight end they picked. So Drake London, they get a gold star for that. Then Charles Cross was picked by the Seahawks. And Garrett Wilson was picked by the Jets. Mel Kiper's 2022 draft rankings. He had Aiden Hutchinson number 1 overall. Right pick there. He had Ikem Iwonu, still don't know how to say his name, believe it or not, as the number 2. Then Sauce Gardner as number 3. Excellent pick. He had Kyle Hamilton as number 4, and that has turned out to be a very good pick because he has been excellent for the Ravens, especially this year. He had Evan Neal number 5, Derek Stingley is number 6, Kayvon Thibodeau as number 7, then Garrett Wilson as number 8, who has been a very solid wide receiver, but not quite on the level of the prior year, but still definitely worthy of a top 10 pick, I would say. Then Trayvon Walker, the number 1 overall pick. And, once again, Mel Kiper, he kind of knows what he's talking about. He's earning some of my respect here. And then Drake London, number 10. So, honestly, I'm pretty impressed by Mel Kiper so far. Third thing is, of course, the consensus board, which had Aiden Hutchinson, number 1. Of course, it would have been the right pick. Sauce Gardner is number 2. Can't go wrong with that. Kayvon Thibodeau, have commented on him, but they had him as the number 3 overall pick. No. Number 4 as Derek Stingley, which I believe is where he should have been picked. Number 5, Trayvon Walker. So they kind of split the middle of Mel Kiper and the actual NFL. They had Kyle Hamilton at 6. So they agreed. They saw what Mel saw. They agreed. The actual NFL drafted him 14th overall. So the NFL got it wrong on this one. Then Akeem Ukonwu, Garrett Wilson, and Evan Neal. So pretty much the same players have been mentioned other than Kyle Hamilton. But the same players have been mentioned just in a very slightly different order. So there's not a material difference between the 3. But once again, I would now do the review of 2022. So here's the review of 2022. Of course, give my commentary as well. Sauce Gardner, number 1 overall pick, and Aiden Hutchinson, number 2 overall pick. Top 2 players from that draft. Hard to disagree with that. They're both Pro Bowlers. They're both, I don't know if Aiden Hutchinson's been an All-Pro or not, but they both eventually will be All-Pros. Number 3 is Stingley, right where he's picked. Hamilton should have been number 4, just like Mel Kiper said. He's really onto something here. Number 5, they have as Trayvon Walker. Charles Cross as the number 1 offensive lineman. Garrett Wilson at number 7. Drake London at number 8. Tyler Smith at number 9. And Chris Olave at number 10. Okay, so I've done some pondering, done some looking into it. And I believe the consensus big board of 2022 was the best out of the 3. Of course, it helps getting the number 1 and number 2 overall players right. Kayvon Thibodeau was solid. Derek Stingley solid. And while they might have made some mistakes towards the bottom of their top 10, I think just getting the top 10 practically all correct is enough to give them the win for this year. Okay, so into 2023. Now, I do apologize for it looking different and looking worse, in my opinion, but I could not find the ESPN one for this year. Kind of seems like it got taken down or something. I don't know, but I couldn't see it when I looked. So here is the listing. A little harder to read, but don't worry. I will read them all out loud to you for you to hear and read through your ears. So Bryce Young was the number 1 overall pick. This appears to have been a mistake. CJ Stroud, the number 2 overall pick, and he clearly should have been the number 1 overall pick. Will Anderson was picked 3rd, also by the Texans. It's been an excellent player. Anthony Richardson was picked the 4th overall pick. It's been very solid in his 3 games, and then he got hurt. Devon Witherspoon, excellent cornerback. Paris Johnson, the 6th overall pick, has been solid. He's done very well. Then Tyree Jackson at number 7, he is honestly disappointed. Bijan Robinson at number 8, and he has been just as good as a running back can be, but they just didn't let him flourish. But the talent is there, the prospect is there, and he will be good eventually, if they let him. Then Jalen Carter at 9, who had an excellent first half of the season and a rough second half, but he was in the lead to be Defensive Rookie of the Year at first, and then he fell apart. And then Darnell Wright to the Bears, another offensive lineman who has been solid. Now to Mel Kiper's list for 2023, he had Jalen Carter as the number 1 prospect, Bryce Young as the number 2, Will Anderson as the number 3, Will Levis as number 4, and then CJ Stroud at 5. So he did not a big CJ Stroud believer. Bijan Robinson at 6, Anthony Richardson at 7, so he didn't believe in him either. And you will notice he had Will Levis number 4 when he actually got drafted in the 2nd round. So there was a big discrepancy here. Then Devon Witherspoon at 8, Christian Gonzalez, who's been a solid player, at 9, and Peter Skronsky at number 10. So you'll notice he did not have Paris Johnson in his top 10. This would be the year I'd say has the biggest difference between the actual draft and Mel Kiper. So maybe they just weren't telling him the truth. His inside sources weren't working out. Or maybe his scouting department however he scouts. I don't know what he does, but his scouting department just told him something different from what the NFL GMs were saying. Then here is the consensus draft board for 2023. Bryce Young, once again, number 1 overall pick. This was a mistake by everybody. Nobody could see it coming. So maybe he'll turn it around. Will Anderson, number 2 overall pick. He was the defensive rookie of the year, so good pick by them. CJ Stroud at 3. So they didn't fall into the trap that Mel Kiper fell into. Jalen Carter at number 4. Devin Witherspoon at 5, Tyree Wilson at 6, Christian Gonzalez at 7, Anthony Richardson at 8, Bijan Robinson at 9, and Will Levis at 10. So, finally, I will get to the redraft. Although, honestly, it's kind of hard to do because we're only 1 year in, so a lot of this could still change. So then, finally, here is the redrafting of the 2023 draft. So, of course, everybody knows number 1 should have been CJ Stroud. He has been excellent. He's, top 10 quarterback in his first year. Number 2, they have Anthony Richardson because he did show a lot of promise. I disagree with this list. I think that Will Anderson should be the number 2 overall pick because he was so good and he improved so much. They have number 4 is Bryce Young, and these people at the Bleacher Report, I just don't quite agree with them. I think he's like, if I redrafted, I wouldn't pick him in the first, at least half of the first round. He didn't really show any promise to me, personally. I would have had Devon Witherspoon at number 3 because he's a Pro Bowl cornerback. And getting that out of a rookie is just, it's quite impressive. Then Paris Johnson, who was the best offensive lineman from the draft. Jalen Carter, who showed a ton of promise early on in the year, then fell off. Bijan Robinson, as I've said. Then Darnell Wright, number 9. And Puka Nacua, number 10, who nobody would have guessed. So, finally, we have one for the consensus win of the 2022 draft. We have one win for Mel Kiper in the 2021 draft. Who will win the 2023 draft? Will it be even throughout the GMs and the NFL and Mel Kiper and the consensus, or will someone win? So this is a bit of a tough one. But to start things off, I'm going to have to kick off Mel Kiper, having CJ Stroud at number 5 and having Will Levis above him. That alone, unfortunately, I will have to kick him off the island. So he will not be the champion. Up next, the NFL draft, the actual draft. They did take CJ Stroud number 2. They did take Will Anderson number 3, Anthony Richardson 4, Devin Witherspoon 5. They had a spree of hits that ended with Tyree Wilson. Sorry, Tyree. But if I compare it to the consensus, it's pretty similar. So, what will be the final thing? But I'm going to have to give it to the 2023 consensus. I forgive Bryce Young going number 1 overall because he did that in each. Will Anderson at 2, CJ Stroud at 3, Jalen Carter at 4. It's just very solid. The only minor difference I see is Will Levis at 10. And, that just didn't happen in the actual draft because Darnell Wright went. And while, yes, Darnell Wright has been decent, Will Levis has showed enough promise in his however many games he played, enough spark to show that he could be a starting NFL quarterback, and the Titans will likely keep him through next year, give him a chance to start. So I think he's worthy of the 10 overall pick. It's not like you're trading up super high. So in review, I believe, if you look at the past 3 years as your sample size, I believe you would be better off using the consensus big board rather than Mel Kiper or the GMs who spend hundreds of millions of dollars, thousands of hours, and their entire life dedicated to it. So, I believe if you or me were to just go online, use this consensus big board, we would create a team that is just as good as what the GMs could draft. At least through the first round. I am completely willing to admit second, third, fourth round, the further it gets, the more the GM's hours are paying off. So, anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider liking and subscribing for more NFL content, and I will see you later.